Babylonians dominated the Middle East 600 years before Christ. Peter Arnett, a CNN war correspondent, commented on the relationship of Saddam and Nebuchadnezzar, and he said this: the exploits of Nebuchadnezzar, this Babylonian king, had and have, that was before Saddam's death, a profound effect on how Saddam views the world in general, and Israel in particular. So Saddam's worldview was shaped by his understanding of dominance in the Middle East, and his hero was Nebuchadnezzar. Eric Klein, PhD historian and archaeologist at George Washington University, also gives us this link. He said, Saddam also portrays himself as the successor to Nebuchadnezzar. In 1979, he was quoted by his semi-official biographer as saying, now these are Saddam's words, Nebuchadnezzar stirs in me everything related to pre-Islamic ancient history. He goes on, and what is most important to me, Saddam says, about Nebuchadnezzar is the link between the Arabs' abilities and the liberation of Palestine. Palestine, of course, is Israel. And so Saddam saw Israel as dominating the land of Palestine, which he believed belonged to Arab forces. Nebuchadnezzar was, this is Saddam saying, after all an Arab from Iraq, albeit ancient Iraq. See, Babylon, the city of Babylon, the capital of ancient Babylon, was about 54 miles south of Baghdad. So it was an Iraqi city. So what Klein is arguing here is, and quoting from the biographer of Saddam, is that Saddam saw himself as the new Nebuchadnezzar to dominate the Middle East. So he was driven by an ideology. And it's that same ideology that is driving ISIS. And if you don't understand that, now this is an amazing picture. This is a billboard that I'll show you later at the ruins of ancient Babylon, 54 miles south of Baghdad. When our American troops came through, we had some friends that took this picture for us. And it's an incredible picture. Here is Saddam, and right next to him in the profile, here is Nebuchadnezzar. They are in a chariot attacking, going through the Middle East to dominate the Middle East. Time magazine's author also saw this connection between Saddam and Nebuchadnezzar. August 1990. Saddam had himself photographed, the editors of Time said, not long ago in a replica of the war chariot of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, who Saddam apparently reveres as his hero. Now, Saddam had a sense of destiny. He believed he was to become the Middle East new Nebuchadnezzar. So this is a picture of Saddam in a replica of the gold-plated war chariot of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, ISIS is inspired by that same ideology to dominate the Middle East. They believe that they need to dominate the Middle East and destroy all infidels. Time magazine goes on to say, speaking about Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, despite a bout of insanity, which is recounted in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar made his name in history by destroying Jerusalem in 587 BC and driving its inhabitants into 70 years of captivity. It is fair warning. In other words, the authors of Time say, if you understand what makes Saddam tick, it's this: his desire to dominate the Middle East, destroy Jerusalem. That's what's behind this. The philosophy of ISIS is very, very similar. Another picture from the days of Saddam, he pictures himself in a chariot like Nebuchadnezzar, with a bow and arrow, with his warplanes and helicopters flying overhead. Now, ISIS has the exact same agenda. They are motivated by a religious, political agenda. And their agenda is, their understanding is, that they've been raised up by Allah, by God, and that they're raised up to destroy all infidelity, which would be Christianity and other Muslims that don't go along, and dominate the entire Middle East. That is their agenda. But wait a minute. God has an agenda for the Middle East. God has an agenda for this world. And I am more interested in studying God's agenda than I am knowing about the agenda of radical groups. Aren't you?
Yes.
Let's look at God's agenda. What's God's agenda? We're going to go back to that Nebuchadnezzar, an ancient king's dream. He reveals God's agenda for the Middle East. One night, Nebuchadnezzar went to sleep. And as he went to sleep, he had a dream. You ever go to sleep and have a dream? Yeah. I know, you're eating too much pizza about 10 o'clock at night, right? So you go to sleep and you have a dream. You wake up the next morning, you can't remember it. All you remember is that you tossed and turned all night in bed. You threw the pillow on the floor. You kicked your wife next to you. You kicked your husband. And they said, what you doing here, you see? But Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And when he had this dream, he couldn't remember what he dreamt the night before. So he wakes up in his capital city. Babylon's 54 miles south of Baghdad. And we have the ruins there today. It was founded after the great flood as the center of the kingdom of Nimrod. Remember, you have the great flood, Noah's day. And Babylon was built on the site, scholars believe, of the Tower of Babel. Right on that very, very site. Nebuchadnezzar has the dream, wakes up the next morning, can't remember what he dreamt. The Bible talks about it in Daniel 2, verse 1. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. So Nebuchadnezzar wakes up. He knows he's dreamt something. He doesn't remember it. The dream that we're going to study tonight will take you down 2,500 years of time. It takes you down from before Nebuchadnezzar's day, right in Nebuchadnezzar's day. It takes you down through nations. It names the 4 great nations that would rule the world. It actually names one of the political leaders, and I'll show it to you in the Bible, 150 years before he was born. It names what would happen in the fate of Europe today. And for 2,500 years, this prophecy has been accurate. You can take history and prophecy and compare it. And we'll take a look at it tonight. The king goes to sleep. He wakes up. His spirit is troubled. He says that his sleep has left him. The next day, he calls him to his bedroom, into his palace, his wise men, all of his magicians and his astrologers and his soothsayers. And he says, I had a dream the night before, but I don't remember what I dreamt. Tell me, what did I dream? And they say, look, you tell us what you dreamt, and we'll tell you what it means. Now, any dream you had, if you tell me what you dreamt, I'll tell you what it means. I may be right or I may be wrong, but I can still tell you, right? So this king was too wise. And this is what the king said. He said, if you can't tell me what I dreamt a few hours ago, how are you going to tell me what happens in the future? Tell me what I dreamt. Or else I'm going to chop you to pieces, cut off your head, and then you're going to be in real trouble when that happens. And so he says, tell me, what did I dream? And they say, King, nobody can do that except God who's up there, and the God who's up there in heaven. There's one man in the kingdom. His name is Daniel. He's a young Jew. He was taken captive when he was 17 years old. Now he's graduated from the University of Babylon at the head of his class. He's about 21 years old now. He's not a magician. He's not an astrologer. He's not a soothsayer. But he's a brilliant young man in his early 20s who's dedicated his heart to God. And he says to the king, God, give me a little time here. I want to go pray. He was facing a crisis, and he went to pray. There's somebody here tonight that you're facing some crisis in your life, some crisis in your marriage, some crisis in your health, some crisis in your finances. There is still a God in heaven. Amen. There's still a God who's there to give you strength. There's still a God that's there to take you through the darkest valley of your life. There's still a God that's there to repair the hurt in your heart. There is still a God in heaven. Nebuchadnezzar knew what to do. When you don't know what to do, you know just what to do. Nebuchadnezzar didn't know what to do. He calls Daniel. But Daniel did know what to do. He went and prayed. And as Daniel prayed, God revealed to him in that dream what the dream was. And Daniel received from God the interpretation. So Daniel says this. He comes back to the king, and he says in Daniel 2, verse 28, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he's made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Daniel does not say there might be a God in heaven. Daniel does not say perhaps there's a God in heaven.